we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, I've got a great show this week. We're going to be talking about OSR tabletop RPG gaming, but we're also going to be talking about Frog God Games, which I have not had the pleasure of talking about that company so far in the tabletop RPG space and, the OSR space. So I'm really looking forward to it. So we have a returning guest who is no stranger to the show, and that is Carl Heyl, who is just a really fun, passionate tabletop RPG gamer. He also is with the Crusader podcast, which is the podcast of Castles of Crusades. And then he's also with the Save or Die podcast, which is an OSR-focused tabletop RPG podcast. So say hi, Carl.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Shane.
You're welcome. And I'm disappointed to hear, even though I can't, you're on audio only, but I'm disappointed to hear that your mohawk is not in full effect right now.
Yeah. I have my quarantine mohawk, but it's not done up at the moment.
It's a tired mohawk. It's a faux hawk. It's not even a faux hawk.
Not even a faux hawk probably takes as much work as a mohawk does. No, it's basically just the leaves of a turnip on the top of my head. It just, without the gel, without the work, it's just hair. It looks awful.
So what you're telling is it's a no hawk.
It's hat. It's time for a hat.
It's time for a hat hawk. Okay. Well, I'm so glad to have you back on. It's always a treat. Always enjoy when I get the chance to play in your games. And I just want to give you a quick shout out. Recently, you've sent out a couple of tweets saying it's totally okay to play dungeon-focused D&D as a tabletop RPG game. It doesn't have to be just a video game. It's totally okay to play it that way, and it's fun to have other people around the table and all that. So
I'm getting on a Twitter soapbox lately about this.
I second your opinion.
I'm saying it's okay to play D&D as a war game.
Yeah.
As if that's how you want to play it, if you want to play it as a dungeon crawling war game, that is a legitimate way to do it.
Yeah, it's totally acceptable. And if you want to play it as a more narrative, whatever, open-ended, that's fine too. So, but I'm with you. I like all kinds of gaming, but I'm totally fine with a war game style dungeon crawl. So kicking the doors, dungeon crawl. All right. So moving on to our other guest, first time on the show, very glad to have him. Bad Mike himself, Michael Badolato of North Texas RPG Con, and also with Frog God Games. So Michael, welcome to Shane Plays. So glad to have you on.
Well, it was great to see you and great to hear Carl's made for radio voice. It makes me feel extremely inaccurate. I just feel like I'm, I can't compete with that. Yeah, I'm totally inadequate.
We hates him, Mike. We hates him.
It's just
we
people like
his,
that.
We hates his lovely voice. You do have the radio voice if one was ever made there, Carl. So,
oh my goodness, thank you.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Mike. What do you do with North Texas and Frog God? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they kind of actually the stories kind of intersect because North Texas RPG Con is a smaller con in the DFW area of Texas, and we've been going on for about 12 years now. And our second or third con, we had Matt Finch our first year, and he was not working for Frog Games at the time. He had his own company, Mythmere Games, and we had him there. He's one of our first special guests, and the reason was because he lived in Houston. I knew he could drive to the con, so we wouldn't have to pay him anything. Carl knows how that is. You try to get some cheap guests there. Hey, can you come over?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me interrupt. I totally forgot to mention that Carl is the driving force behind Arkansas RPG Con. I'm sorry about that, Carl. Anyway, go on.
All right.
So as con organizers, you want to get guests that are cheap. All right, that's where we ended off. So,
cheap and they can make their own way to the con. If you don't have to buy a plane ticket, you're okay. Well, he had been approached by Bill Webb to buy his OSR game, Swords and Wizardry. And so he said, you need to come to this con in Dallas called North Texas Con. I don't go to cons anymore. Like, no, you'd like this one. It's only got a couple hundred people. It's real small. It's real intimate. So Bill came to the con, I think our third year, loved it, just absolutely just went nuts, because this is the way he remembers cons used to be, small and intimate. All the special guests are just sitting right there. There's no barriers to any kind of entry or barriers to seeing special guests. We don't charge any special guest fee type things. They sign everything. They talk to you. You can go have dinner with them, whatever you want to do. So he started bringing the entire Frog God staff to our con, probably about year 4 or 5, and that became their annual. They had their annual stockholders meeting at our con, and so a few years later, Zach Glazer, who had been out of gaming for quite a long time, got back into gaming, and he came to one of our cons, and he had come out with a box set called Whisper and Venom, which is still it's been out of print for a while, still very well regarded in the OSR community. We're actually publishing a 5th edition version at Frog God next year. But he met Bill and met the Frogs, and they were very impressed by his writing. He a couple years later, he did another box set, Death and Taxes, also really well written, very well received in the OSR community. So they ended up hiring Zach, and so at that point, pretty much all my friends ended up working at Frog God Games, and when they didn't really have a customer service person at first. Just Zach was doing customer service, but his responsibilities started getting bigger and bigger, and he eventually became the company's COO. And so he, at one point, said, "Look, you need to start doing this customer service, because I've done customer service my entire life. This is really easy for you." I'm like, "No, I don't want to do another job right now. I'm busy doing this." And so he basically just beat me down over time and said, "Look, it's going to be really easy. You're going to do this. All you need to do is add files to people's accounts and just answer questions, and you're good at customer service." And so he and Bill eventually wore me down. And so I think I've been there about 2 or 3 years now. And I'm also a stockholder in the company too, by the way.
Oh, nice.
I totally forgot about that. I'm a big fat 1% stockholder in Frog God Games.
You got more stock than I do.
Yeah. I love that that's that $16 dividend check that rolls in every quarter or so. No, but it's a little more than that. But it's great. So I have a vested interest in the company, and I do. Because of North Texas, I got to meet the Frogs, and because of that, I actually get to go to cons like Gary Con and Gamehole Con, Reaper Con. We visit quite a few cons during the year. Have not been to Carl's Con yet, and that's mostly has to do with the fact that I think it's always during some other con.
Yeah, there's a conflict
if I remember correctly.
With another con. I know
there's always a conflict with the con, but I'd love to go. I talked to Mike and Liz Stewart. They went. Was it last year or the year before?
2 years ago. No,
2 years ago.
Well, this past one we didn't have it, or Carl didn't have it, because I feel like because I like to go to it. But like literally, it was just a couple of miles down from my house last time at a place called, believe it or not, Woody Sherwood Forest. It's a nice event center. But anyway, I've watched it grow. I got off on a tangent. This past year, Carl didn't have it because of COVID. But I think they came 2 years before that, if I remember right.
Right.
And
they told me they had a great time. I've been wanting to go because I really enjoy the small con experience. One of the things when Doug and I started North Texas, we wanted to make the kind of con that we would like to go to. We don't like big, giant bunker buster cons.
Right. I don't either.
I loved them when I was a kid. I went to Gen Con back in the day, some other big cons, and they're great. But I'm in my 50s now. I'm stay off my lawn. I don't want big crowds.
I'm with you.
And I don't want to get jostled around. And the last year I went to Gen Con, they actually had I want to say 29,000 people, and I think last year they had 65,000, 70,000. So it's just gotten out of control. And I love small cons. I've been wanting to go to Carl's for a while because it's right in that sweet spot of about, a few hundred people. We cap our attendance every year at 500, which is crazy because one of the things when you have a con is you want to make money during your con. Well, you don't want to go broke. You want to at least break even. And so what you try to do is I call it the 1,000% person. When you get to 1,000 people, you start making money. When you get 1,000 people at your con, that's because if you start charging $50 to $60 a person, you start adding the money up. Well, if you have 1,000 people come to your con, you got $50,000 to $60,000 in hand. After you pay all the special guests and pay for the venue, this and that, you usually have a few bucks left over. You don't really want to cap your con at too low a number unless you're just doing it for the love of the game, like Carl and I, and you're just like, let's just do it and have fun. And if we make money, great. We've actually never made money with North Texas. We broke even a few times.
Yeah, I do not like the big con experience. North Texas was like, and I've done a show. I'll link it in the show notes. I've waxed poetic about North Texas. If somebody designed a con for me, it's North Texas. It's big enough that there's plenty of games going on, but it's small enough you can get it. You can pretty much talk to whoever you want. You can do whatever you want. Like, a perfect example of what you were just talking about, Michael, with the guests not being up on pedestals and stuff like that. Like, I was in a game with Jeff D, where Jeff D was running a D&D game. And he was talking to a guy next to me named Steve. And I was sitting there chatting with Steve the whole game. Turns out that was Steve Perrin from, like RuneQuest and everything. It's just that intimate, and, you can walk up and the special guests don't have their noses in the air. They'll hang out.
That is a huge, that's one of the things we wanted to, and we're one of the few cons where this is no joke. Literally almost 10% of our guests our attendees are special guests because Doug goes way overboard in getting, we usually have about 20 to 25 guests. He recently cut way down. The last year I want to say we only had 20, but we've had years where we've had 30 special guests because it's just it's a wide variety. It's mostly OSR type personalities. And we have a lot of the artists that go back. Jeff D's one of them. We have a lot of the artists like Jeff Easley, Darlene, Errol Otis. I've actually, you talked about being, right next to these guys. I've run a game with Errol Otis playing in my game twice, which was like a bullet point to my life, pretty much. When he asked to, I got an email from a few years ago. I run a BX game, which actually Carl played in. Carl, your son played in it, right? About 3 or 4 years ago.
Me and my wife, yeah.
Your wife, I couldn't remember. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was you and your son or you and your wife. Okay, you and your wife. And I run a BX game every year. I run B1 in Search of the Unknown. And Errol sent me an email one of the just most iconic artists of D&D. I get this email, and he's like, I was just wondering if it's not too much trouble. Is there any way I could possibly get into your game? Because I saw it was full. First of all, I complained, going, "Hell no, dude! If you don't sign up, you don't get in my game." And I'm just like, "Hell yes!"
You got a strong hand when you could tell Errol Otis no.
I was like, no, you're in, brother. I'm not gonna, But so he did that year. It was great because he sat down. And so he's just sitting there, and if you ever seen Errol Otis, he just looks like an accountant. He looks like a middle-aged accountant guy. He does, the crazy artwork he did. Yeah. He does not look like an artist or a wacko. He just looks like a regular guy. Not nicest guy you've ever met. Just soft-spoken, very articulate. And he sat there for about half the game before everybody knew who he was. And then I gave it away when we had a break right in the middle, and I asked him to sign. I hand out a bunch of BX rule books. So if anybody wants to use one, they can use it. And I said, "Oh, Errol, by the way, could you sign all these BX rule books?" And the little light went on everybody's head at the table as he started signing it. They're like, "Oh, that's who you are. Okay, cool."
No, it's exactly like that at North Texas. I mean, you don't like it's funny you mentioned Errol Otis because when I went a couple of years ago, there was a little raffle ticket jar that you put your name on and dropped it in there. And when I was dropping it in, the thing that was on top of all the other ones was Errol Otis, the signature. I was like, that's Errol Otis.
I should have gone through there and got those raffle tickets.
Stole the tickets. But
he's the nicest guy. You can give him a pile of stuff to sign. He just signs it. He signs whatever you set in front of him. I do that every few years. I say, Errol, can I just get like 5 minutes of your time? He's like, sure. And I just give him a stack of stuff because some of the stuff we auction off, some we give away as prizes. So he's just great about that. They all are. We don't have any problems with any guests.
There's a good amount of vendors plenty of games going on. Of course, you have the Saturday night auction, which is really, you just got to kind of see it to believe it. So, and that you run that, don't you?
Well, we have a regular auction, and a few years ago, I'm a huge egomaniac when it comes to. No, I'm just kidding. No, but I've always wanted to do something where I just did just kind of a fun, silly auction, and it's kind of born out of. You ever Tracy Hickman does something at cons called Breakfast. Oh God, I can't remember the name of it. Something Breakfast. And he'll do a thing where he runs this game, and you sit up on the stage, and he kills off your character one by one. And the funny part is he kills off all your characters, and then you go sit down, and then so other people come. And a lot of famous people will also participate in Tracy Hickman's game. Well, I want to do something like that, just something kind of very audience participation, something crazy. So I started the midnight auction, which starts at midnight, the last night of the con. Everybody's kind of let down. They're tired. Right. They're going to go home the next day. So I want to have something really fun, and so I dress up like the devil, and I auction off crazy stuff and just junky stuff, and just oddball things. Like I always auction, I always auction off a set of the Tom Hanks Mazes and Monsters DVD. And just always just crazy. And then so it's gotten bigger and bigger over the years. It's kind of got out of control because
the room was packed. Like I had I had to stand outside and look in the year I was there, and but you'll get some collectible stuff in there too, like the TSR Dynasty stuff. Game, and
we make fun of a lot of the old time guys. We have when you go to the midnight auction, you got to be prepared because you may be sitting there enjoying yourself, and you may start getting made fun of by Satan.
It's an auction.
I will pick on you. Yes, I will pick on people. I picked on Zeb Cook a few years ago because I had found out that little known Zeb Cook when he was at TSR worked on the honeymoon. He worked on some game. They had a bunch of board games at one point. They were TV based, and one of them was the Honeymooners game, and another one was what's the old sitcom in the bar? Everyone knows your name. Cheers. Yeah. He worked on the Cheers game, but all the credits were left off the games because these guys they consider themselves quote unquote professional game designers. And so no, and so I found out that he did the lead on the Cheers game, and so when I auctioned it off, I blew his cover, and I said, well, this is somebody in the audience has worked in this game, and I'm not going to name who it is. If they're willing to reveal themselves, I'm going to let them now. And then Zeb stood up. He said, "It was me, damn it, it was me."
It's like a Perry Mason moment. Yeah, it's like Perry Mason.
Because I admit it, I did it. We have a picture of him holding the game above his head, shaking it. It was hilarious. So yeah, we have fun with the midnight auction. We get a little risque sometimes too. And it's 18 and older. Let's put it that way.
And what is it? Is it something like the midnight auction and shrimp roast or something? Is it some weird name?
That was a Zach Glazer edition. Okay. Yes, and seafood buffet.
That was it.
There's actually never been a seafood buffet, so that's part of Satan lying to you. Is that he gets you in there with a seafood buffet, but there's actually no seafood buffet. So
that's great. Yeah, speaking of, and then what? I could talk about North Texas the whole show, but I'll say one last thing, and then we'll move on and talk a little bit about where we think the OSR scene is right now, and then we'll talk about Frog God. But I almost took Zeb Cook out with a clothing, the little clothing cart that you push around that has and I just had it completely loaded up, and I rounded a corner and I came really close to taking out a legend of gaming. So I was glad that I didn't.
It's never a good bullet point in your career. I was at a con, I took out a legend of gaming with my car. That's never a good bullet point.
Yeah. No shame. Then I was like, oh, maybe I should have got him to sign my Oriental Adventures. And I was like, maybe not.
There. By the way, while you're laying on your back on the ground, could you sign this, Mr. Cook?
Exactly. All right. But I have to give respect to Carl because Carl's the reason why I went to North Texas, because he was running me through a BX game 2 or 3 years ago up at a local game store, and he was just raving about North Texas. He wouldn't be quiet about it. So I went.
It's fantastic. It's a great convention.
Yeah. So I went. All right. Anyway, but folks, yeah, check out, and I'll link in the show notes again. There's a podcast I did talking about North Texas. Highly recommended.
We'll release the second or the first weekend in June. We'll have to see about this year. We don't know yet, obviously,
Right.
with the COVID crisis going on. But we're hoping in the next 7 months we'll have some good news in that respect. So,
Well, I definitely want to go. I missed it. There's a lot of stuff. Even as much as I love gaming, a lot of gaming events I could take them or leave them. To be honest, even though I enjoy gaming, I felt the pain of not going this past year. So
we did have the con, but we basically said, look, we only want local people to show up. If you have to travel, please don't travel.
Right.
So we only had about 60 to 80 people that showed up various times, and we kind of had to have the con because the way the contract worked is we have the place for 3 years. So
that's right. There was the whole hotel situation.
Yeah, we had the whole hotel right.
Yeah,
we had to. Otherwise, if we'd have canceled, we wouldn't have got our money back. So we went ahead and had it. It was funny because we were so distanced because we had the whole hotel.
It's like playing bingo.
Oh my gosh, it was crazy. We had one table in like a ballroom. So I mean, we tried to remain as safe as possible. We had masks on. We were very distant.
So they're like, okay, I attacked the rust monster, and you roll like the big bingo thing with a bunch of D20s in it. Okay, you roll a 5. But anyway, and Carl, I missed Arkansas RPG. Carl just canceled Arkansas RPG Con this past year for COVID, but I definitely missed both of them. You were talking about coming to Arkansas RPG Con if you could, Michael. It really doesn't even feel like, it just feels like a bunch of gamers got together in a room one day to have some fun. I mean, and I like that. That's
perfect. That's exactly
good.
The vibe I like. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. So what I want to ask you guys, and I like OSR. I like to play BX. I'm running, we took a pause on our 5e game right now, and I'm running my group through Ravenloft in 1e right now. I love to check out like Swords and Wizardry and Castles and Crusades, and and there's a lot of OSR in me that I love because I started playing games in the early 80s. So OSR to me is just gaming, right? I like to play the West End games Star Wars if I have to choose which Star Wars I want, and I love the old Middle Earth and MERP and all that stuff. But you guys, I feel, are closer to quote unquote the OSR scene than I am. So I just wanted to give you both a chance to maybe talk about why you love OSR and what do you think the OSR scene looks like right now? Like, is it strong right now? I mean, it feels strong to me, but what do you guys think? And I'll let Carl go first. And then
Carl, I yammered enough. Carl has great. I love Carl's insights too. Carl will have some excellent insights. I always think on this kind of stuff. So,
well, I think, as far as the scene right now, I think it almost, to some degree, feels weaker because of how strong the RPG scene is now. It's a weird thing to think about, but the OSR has grown, I mean, for sure, but so has RPG gaming in general. So now when you look at OSR against this giant beast that is 5th edition D&D, that's just taking over. I mean, it's a huge game. It even though our pond has gotten bigger, it almost feels smaller because of how big 5th edition is. But I mean, I think that's just a mentality you got to get past. You got to, I think a lot of people go, I can't find people that want to play AD&D or Swords and Wizardry or Castles and Crusades because everybody's playing 5th edition. Well, I think there's willingness to do that, but I think what happens a lot of times when people try to get people to play OSR games is they pitch it as an insular or esoteric thing, which really, if you can play 5th edition, you can play any OSR game. I mean, it would be simpler in my mind to play any OSR game. So I think that's one of the things you have to consider when you talk about these games is they're only different under a microscope. You can look at the experience around the table, and that's been the same for a long, long time. The rules are different, but not so different that you're going to get a lot of confusion from someone who's only played 5th edition. which is going to be a huge influx for people who want to try older versions of Dungeons and Dragons or games that emulate older versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Are these people who have been playing 5th edition for 2, 3, 4, 5 years now that may want to just take a look back and see what else is out there?
And there's, I want to take a moment, with Shane Plays, I try to introduce people to different things so that, even though I cover tabletop RPGs a lot on this show, I'm not exclusively a tabletop RPG podcast. So OSR is, people have different definitions. I call it old school rules, but what is your acronym there?
I like old school role playing.
Okay.
I don't think that's anybody else uses that very often, but that's the one I like.
Right.
It's just, it just works for me.
Right. But basically the OSR movement, for one of a better, people call it a movement. It feels weird to me to call it a movement. I just see it as a type of gaming, is you're playing tabletop role-playing games that are either legitimately from the day, they're older games, or you're playing newer games that are either iterations on those old rules, or they're newer mechanics, but they feel old school. And that's hard to define, the feel old school. But
I honestly think that, OSR generated as a term to be able to kind of say this works with TSR D&D.
Okay.
And it was a trademark term, though it wasn't trademarked. It was just a way to just kind of put a stamp on your product to show that it works with X, Y, and Z.
Interesting. See, I didn't even know that. So that's really interesting.
That's where it comes from. But because it is a community, because it is a group of people who are just playing games, people would ask, well, what about Call of Cthulhu? That's obviously old school role playing. It was the 1970s when it came out, but is it OSR? And I think that the tendency when you're in a group that is focused on cooperative gaming and you're a group of outcasts is to say, yes, come on in. And so that's expanded the term, and so now,
that's how I think of it. I never even knew that it originated as a way to saying this will be compatible with your BX or whatever, or 1st edition or whatever. I didn't even know that. So how do you define it for yourself, Michael?
Well, I usually call it old school Renaissance, and it's interesting that Carl brought that up because OSR started in probably about 2006, 2007, and it started as a way to play older games that at the time were out of print, because not a lot of people understand back then. You couldn't. There were no reprints of the 1st edition D&D rule books out there. There weren't any. You could buy originals, but a lot of those were online. They were kind of expensive. They didn't have the PDFs of those available. They just weren't available. There were, unless you had the books yourself, there was no way to play old school games. And so the OSR came about as a way as, look, we're going to make games that are exactly compatible to these games that are out of print, and you'll actually be able to play the way games were being played. Because for those of you that don't know, D&D 3.0 was out at the time, 3.5. It was a lot different than 1st and 2nd editions. It was different enough to be almost a separate game. It was almost totally different how they did every skill and combat and ability in the game than what had come before. So people who were longing to play the earlier editions really didn't have a lot of ways to go about that. A rule set came out by Matt Finch and I can't remember the other gentleman's name. Gosh, it's just my brain's not working tonight. But it was called OSRIC.
The gentleman listed on the cover of the 1st edition of OSRIC as editor-in-chief is Stuart Marshall, and Wikipedia lists Stuart Marshall and Matt Finch as the designers.
And what it was is it was a way to publish adventures. Basically, it was a reprint of 1st edition D&D with all the numbers filed off. Everything filed off, and it's just called. We're going to call it OSRIC. Well, it was so popular that people used the rules to actually write adventures, and that's when Matt Finch got the idea to do Swords and Wizardry, which was it was a way of playing OD&D or original D&D, the original white or brown box three book rule set. without actually having to have that rule set, which costs hundreds of dollars. And it was not in PDF form at the time. So it was a way to. I kind of agree with Carl saying in terms of, do you need the OSR as much anymore? You don't, because we're talking about 2007 now. Jump ahead 13 years.
Right.
You can find stuff's easy to find. As a matter of fact, the rule books have been reprinted. There's a reprint several years ago of the original D&D books, the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, Dungeon Master Guide. They're available on PDF.
Right. Yeah, you can go to Drive-Thru RPG and buy a lot of these original games. Yeah.
So it's not really as needed as it was. And then 5e is actually the most popular and best-selling edition of Dungeons & Dragons ever. I mean, even at the heyday of Dungeons and Dragons in 84, 83, 84, the fifth edition version sells better than anything ever. I mean, right. it's an 800-pound gorilla of gaming. I mean, but it also has the Starbucks effect, and it's risen. Other games have risen up because of 5e. Because people play 5e and they say that's great, and so. Well, I'll give you an example. At our con, we have a lot of people that come there, and even though we cater to OSR old school type games, a lot of people play 5th edition D&D. We have a lot of people that go back and forth. They'll play a 5th edition game, then they'll go play an AD&D game. And a lot of times just because they want to see what those games look like. And so sometimes they'll play an original D&D game and say, you know what, I like that better than 5e. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens occasionally. Where they'll say, like, I kind of like how simple this is and how easy it is to roll up characters and do. Now, 5th edition is one of the reasons it's the most popular edition of D&D. Is it's very easy to get into. It's very easy to play. It's easy to understand. It's a really, really good rule set. But some people they still want something even simpler. Or I just want to do this and roll these dice and have this character and I want 5 minutes and I want to be in the dungeon. And so old school rule sets are perfect for that. And so while maybe it's not as needed as much as it was, 10, 15 years ago, there's still definitely a place for OSR games. They're still popular. I mean, Frog God Games, that's kind of even though we publish 5th edition versions of everything we do, we still sell quite a few copies of the Swords and Wizardry versions we do. We do everything in 5th edition and Swords and Wizardry. So we actually do Pathfinder versions too still.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, we definitely want to, folks, and we're going to talk about Frog God Games before the show's over, because I want to, they're, Wizards of the Coast and D&D is the 800-pound gorilla. But there are a lot of wonderful companies out there putting out some really cool games. So I try to build relationships and highlight those companies when I can. Where I'm fortunate, I've got Troll Lord Games right here in my city. I've gotten to know Steve Chenault, over the past few years, and I know Carl, you're helping, like with the Crusader podcast and all that now. But I didn't even know. This is why I love having these conversations. I knew that Swords and Wizardry was OSR, but I never knew that Swords and Wizardry was intended to be like, okay, if you want to play OD&D and you can't get here it is. So I love learning that kind of stuff.
Matt did that purposely because at the time the OSRIC was an aping of the rules of first edition. He wanted to do his own thing. He'd gone off on his own, and he thought, well, you know what? No one's ever done a version of OD&D, and at the time, the open game license made that possible. The open game license, which was something that WotC had brought out for 3.0, which means you can write stuff for our product. Well, Matt Finch also had the mental leap where he realized that not only can you write material for Dungeons & Dragons, you could write your own rule set as long as you filed the serial numbers off. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And so after he did that, you saw a lot of OSR type rule sets come up. Labyrinth Lord was a copy of BX or basic D&D. Pretty much every older version of D&D has a newer version now, or a OSR version. And what I think is funny is not just D&D, but some of the lesser games of the time, like there's a I guess an OSR version of like something like Top Secret. Some of the other games also said, wait a second, if they can do that for D&D, we can do that for our rules set too. Gamma World is one. There's a game called Mutant Future that's a copy of Gamma World. So yeah, it was a huge revolution at the time because people realized that they didn't have to lose their old games; they could just rewrite them,
Mm-hmm.
and not only that, they could do a house rules version. I don't like this rule; I'm going to pull this rule out. I'm going to put another rule in. But there's 3 or 4 versions of OSR versions of basic D&D. There's not just one. There's several of those.
Yeah, I've played Blueholme. In fact, I played Blueholme at
Blueholme's one, yeah.
Yeah, I played Blueholme at Arkansas RPG Con and got a free copy. Alex, I have an advertising agreement with Crusader magazine, and Alex, the publisher of Crusader magazine, actually ran that. Were you there, Carl, at the table when we played Blueholme?
I played Alex's game. I've got the game with Alex before, but I was not.
That was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, there's they've taken I've seen OSR versions of the West End Games D6 system. I've seen it's probably out there if you could think of it. Somebody's so and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, okay, we're going to do an OSR version of BX D&D Basic Expert. But then what you'll do is you'll get like a similar rule set, but then you'll have different classes or races or something that weren't in the original. So they'll kind of iterate on it a little bit. But yeah, I enjoy it. But what I like to do is I'll take my group, or if I'll either at a con, I'll do a one shot, or I'll every now and then we'll take a break from our normal campaign with my group, because most of them are younger, not all of them, but most of them are younger, and I'll introduce them to the older games. We'll play AD&D First Edition. We'll play BX. I took them through Keep on the Borderlands. We'll play because I want them it's fun for me. I'm system promiscuous. I like to play in different systems. I like to go and play in that one and that one and that one because I love to see how the math and all of the tone of it works together and all that. But 2, I want them to understand where gaming came from, and they tend to enjoy it because it's interesting to watch a group that has only played 5e, and you drop them into a BX game, and it's you got to have a whole different strategy. You can't just roll in and start womping on stuff.
Wait a second. I can actually die in this game?
Yeah.
Yes, you can actually die in this game.
Yeah, you can get one-shotted.
You're not on 5e anymore, kid.
Yeah.
You can actually...
you can get one-shotted.
You're rolling up another character pretty quick here.
And it's interesting watching them spontaneously. They'll start developing tactics. Okay, you're going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to go over there because we all have a specialized role. And you see the different type of gaming that it used to be, where now it's much more fluid, who's doing what, and the specific role of the person in the class, that class's role may not be anywhere near as specific as it was. But yeah, watching somebody get blasted and stepping back real quick. I mean, my little role-playing heart, like I said, I started playing in the 80s, so this is how I imprinted. If I die in the first encounter, it kind of makes me happy. I mean, I'm just like, okay, we're playing. It's like, don't even give your character a name or a backstory till 3rd level, kid. Let's go. Or you're just like, okay, well, he's dead, but now his son, who looks just like him, has come to avenge him. So it's Bob the second. Let's go. I just enjoy it. But there's also much more of a narrative focus on games these days, I think. There's a huge narrative, and there's been a lot of change on why people play games. Like, I play games purely for escapism, but there's literally people out there using games to like learn something or to put themselves into somebody else's shoes or therapy. So there's the hobby has grown in ways I never would have anticipated when I first started playing.
Well, nostalgia is a powerful drug. I mean, and a lot of the drive behind OSR type games, it's nostalgia. I mean, I think that if you looked at the OSR audience, I think it would skew mostly older, right. Probably in their 40s or older. So that's definitely an aspect of it. But there's also the aspect of the point you made was exactly true. The focus on narrative over, I guess, well, the origins of RPGs are in war games, and a lot of the war game-isms stayed around through first edition D&D and even through second edition D&D. At this point, they've pretty much taken out most of the most of the war game type isms in there, and it's much more narrative process now. It's much more like, look, this is more about story than just here's a bunch of orcs and here's a bunch of you guys and you're going to fight the orcs and have a big giant battle. We're going to roll tons of dice. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I love those games too, but it's more now about, okay, well, afterwards we're going to go to the inn and talk to the innkeeper and discuss this and that, and you may spend a whole session, just talking, right, working out stuff. It's definitely changed. There's a lot of people that still like that. Look, just give me the dice. I want to roll it and I want to kill some bad guys. There's still a lot of that in there. And like you said, some people will try 5th edition, but then they say, well, I want to see how the older games are played. And I have talked to people who said, yeah, I played 5th edition, but you know what? I came to this convention because I know you guys run old school games, and I wanted to try 1st edition D&D run by one of the guys that wrote the rules. I wanted to see how that game was.
And I think that's a wonderful way to see conventions. When I go to a convention and I'm either playing or running a game, I want to either run or play something I don't normally get to play. So the conventions, that is how I go into conventions. Like, I haven't played that in forever, or I want to introduce people to this, or, oh my goodness, you're running the original Traveler. I'm there. Put me in Traveler, But like I said, I like 5th edition. I started running it years ago for local game shop. And so I ran 5th edition because that's what they had in the store. So, I wanted to help them sell their product. And I do like 5th edition. But I mean, I love it. Like, if anyone ever gets a chance for Carl, he'll bring dominoes and he will play BX with you, and he will build the dungeon as he goes with the dominoes. And it's so much fun just playing some BX, and he'll, just do it. It's a different thing. Like you were saying, there's a different a different thought process in the old days, kids. A lot of D&D was problem solving. Can I beat this dungeon? Can I beat the traps? Can I beat the monsters? Can I Can I get to the final? And the dungeon didn't have to make ecological sense. I don't care why a vampire's in a room next to a rust monster, next to an OTUG or OTU, however you say them. It doesn't matter. It's an experiment to see, can I beat this dungeon? And it was very much, like you had to have a logical approach, and that's where 10-foot poles came from and all of this stuff. And I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with, playing a more narrative game. But my roots are, because when people started saying, well, why are those goblins in that room next to I was like, I've never even thought of that. I don't care. It's a dungeon. But, as things iterate and more people come into the hobby, they bring a different, kind of perspective to it. So, well, let me ask you this, and then I want to talk about Frog God Games. If there's somebody listening to this and they're like, I wouldn't mind checking out an old school game. I've never done that before. But Michael, I'll let you take a shot at this, and then, Carl, you as well. What do you have a game you would recommend to them? Like, I would recommend BX. I would say go play BX. I think that's a wonderful example of old school gaming, D&D. And obviously Frog God has Sword and Wizardry, but what would your answer be there, Michael?
Well, I'm going to have to. First of all, I have a few suggestions. First of all, I'm going to go with Swords and Wizardry because I work for Swords and Wizardry.
Sure, right, yeah.
I work for the company that produces it. But we just came out with a new box set that'll be available either later this year or early next year. It's a definite. It's a change from our first few printings, which were hardback books. It's going to be a box set in the very nature of the original box set. It has 3 books inside. It's going to be a huge nostalgia callback. So it's going to be a box set with the books in there. There's going to be a short adventure in there, and everything you'll need to play the game is in there. I've edited it, looked over it, and it's really good. Very simple. It's going to be out of the box. You can run the game out of the box.
When will this be available for digital hands?
We did a Kickstarter for it last year. It should be available either The physical product should be available later this year or early next year. I believe the PDF will definitely be available later this year, but the physical product will be available later this year or early next year. That's a good beginning. I also a couple of my personal favorites. I like Labyrinth Lord a lot. Labyrinth Lord is by Goblinoid Games, and it's a copy of BX. It's a BX clone.
Yeah. It seems like there are a lot of BX clones out there.
Yeah, BX. It's one of my favorite ones. There's a few other really good BX clones, but my favorite one's probably Labyrinth Lord. I like that a lot. Blueholme is really interesting. Blueholme is a clone of the Holmes rule. The Holmes rules were weird. They were Eric Holmes was given the job of basically making a basic game. Then once he made it, they immediately tossed it aside and said, no, we don't really want to do that. We're working on AD&D now, and then AD&D. After that, they said, we do want a basic game, but we don't want it to have Holmes rulebook. So it's really interesting. It's a very interesting rule set in that it was only written for levels 1, 2, and 3, and after that, you had to imagine past that. Blueholme does a very good job of bringing that whole sensibility in there to where, you're playing this game that really was never meant to be sort of sensibility. It's really interesting.
So it's not even the Moldvay. It's the original, which makes sense because it's Blueholme, Holme. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, right. It was a blue. Yeah, it was made because it was a blue rule book, and it's called the Holmes rules because Dr. Holmes wrote it. Right. But it's a good rule set on its own. Blueholme, I think, is a very good rule set. Castles of Crusades is interesting. I like Castles of Crusades a lot, but I think it requires a little more knowledge than some of the other OSR type games out there. I mean, Carl can probably give you a lot more information on that than I could, because he's much more connected to the. I don't actually play Castles of Crusades, but I would start with either Swords and Wizardry or something like Labyrinth Lord. There's also there's some first edition clones out there. None of them really have caught my fancy like Labyrinth Lord or Swords and Wizardry. But that's where I would start. Okay. Is one of those two. And if you, I'm going to plug real quick Frog God. If you go to the website, we actually have one of the agreements that Matt Finch made with Bill Webb when they worked for the company is that the Swords and Wizardry PDF is free. It's always been free, and it always will be free.
The full PDF.
Well, PDF is free. Nice. So if you go to the site, you can download the rules system for free. If you go to the Frog God Games, froggodgames.com, and you can download it for free.
I'm going to do that. So, I mean, you can't beat that, folks. Go check it out. The only thing you're risking is a little bit of data and a little bit of time and download.
Free is free. Yeah, free is free. Yeah. Come on.
So, my take, talking about Castles of Crusades, I enjoy Castles of Crusades, but it's more of a AD&D first edition complexity versus a BX complexity. There's a little bit more to it. But I will give Troll Lord a shout out. When the OGL was published for third edition D&D, allowing people to sort of take the D&D game engine and publish it with variations and stuff, Troll Lord was one of the first people out the gate to take that plunge, and get out there. And they've done a very good job of building a loyal community. And they have a ton of adventures and resources, and they're always kickstarting stuff and everything. So I personally didn't feel that Castles of Crusades was hard to get into, but I mean, I've been playing role-playing games for years, so it's hard for me to judge, how complex it would be to jump into. But Carl, what would you recommend people? As the host of the Crusader podcast, do you have a OSR or more than one OSR game that you would recommend to people?
Well, so specifically about Castles of Crusades is it's really there's a lot of modernism in it. I don't even know that I consider it OSR personally. Now it's certainly got an old school feel to it.
Well, that's why I consider it that feel.
Right. But right. I mean, I know the trolls don't really consider it OSR. They think of that as a separate thing. Okay. Obviously, everybody's definition of that is different. And I mean, there's going to be people who call it OSR, and I think that's perfectly reasonable. But the thing I will say for Castles and Crusades is right now, if you played it, you would probably say this feels kind of like a stripped down 5th edition D&D. You would think it was a 5th edition knockoff, even though it came out years prior.
That's the funny thing. They pioneered ability checks. Well, I don't know if they pioneered it, but they're the ones that first put it into a D&D, OGL game, as far as I know.
Ability saving throws, yeah. That was a huge thing for CNC, a big even on their like earlier, and I think still on their character sheets, it has a conversion where it shows that your strength check is a paralysis check and your con check is a poison check, just to kind of go with the old save array. But if you're gonna go for a game that you want to try to get the feel of an old school game that's easy to access, I don't think there's a better choice than Swords and Wizardry. And one thing you can do if you don't want to try to digest the entire book is you can look at Swords and Wizardry Lite, which is a product they have that's 4 pages. It's a real sleek, slimmed down version of the Swords and Wizardry rules. If you're, pretty experienced with gaming, I think it will all make sense to you. It's very streamlined. And because of that, it doesn't really hold your hand at all. You're kind of off to the races with it. And if you've got to fill in some information for sure, but it does a really good job of giving you everything you need to play levels 1 through 3 with just 4 pages of rules.
Nice. So do you recommend, and this is a question for either of you, do you recommend a clone over the original? Like when I play with you, Carl, we're usually playing BX. We're playing straight BX. Do you recommend a clone over just saying, hey, just go get yourself a copy of the BX rules off Drive-Thru RPG and playing those? Or do you think that there's an advantage that the clones have had all the years and the advantage of hindsight to maybe tweak a couple of things?
I think that's true of Holmes Basic, OD&D, AD&D. I think there's a lot of esotericness to those rule sets. I don't think it's as true for stuff like BX and BECME. I think around that time, 83, 85, we had it pretty much figured out. Those are pretty digestible, pretty easy to understand, pretty straightforward on how to play them. The reason I would suggest a clone is because of accessibility. Maybe you want to just try old school D&D and you don't want to try a clone and you want to put down the $5 to $10, depending on which PDF you're going to get from Drive-Thru.
Right.
You can check out Swords and Wizardry or check out Labyrinth Lord has a free version, or check out Basic Fantasy from Chris Gonnerman. That is a completely free PDF library for that game. And that's a BX clone. And all of these will give you a very similar feel. And at the same time, I love the OSR. I love these game systems. I love the fact that there's people still innovating within these systems. It's neat. It's current. It's happening right now. I think that will drive some people to be more interested in that than these products that are sort of time capsules. And I think there's merit to either. I think it's nice to see the time capsule and play Keep on the Borderlands using BX. And I think that's a great experience. But it's also nice to, see that people like Silver Boulay are releasing products right now for old school rules and their cool adventures.
Well, one of the advantages that clones and retro clones have over the originals is we've had 40 years of game design since then. So for instance, the original AD&D Player's Handbook does not have an index. There's no index in there. We look at that now and you're thinking that's insane. Imagine publish a rule now with an index. The original OD&D white box rules are literally unplayable unless somebody shows you how to play. You cannot just open up an original white box and say, okay, let's play, because the rules don't make any sense. They require you to know at least a little bit of wargaming, and probably to own chainmail, which was was a war game at the time that had some fantasy aspects. Whereas, for instance, Matt Finch's Swords and Wizardry, you can play that right out of the box. Easy play. And a lot of older games are like that. It's almost like they required a certain level of mastery for you just to even understand the rules. And I don't want to say that older companies deliberately made the rules obtuse, but they did sort of play into the look. If you're playing our game, you must be really a smart guy, and so we're going to put some really kind of obtuse, weird things in there. Newer games don't do that as much, and I think that they're more about understandability and playability, and just a lot of it just has to do with, like I said, 40 years of game design. We now know how to publish games much better than we did back then. We know that you have section A that talks about this, and section B talks about that, and section C. Whereas back then you would read a rule book and it would just go all over the place. Like, we're going to talk about space travel here, but here we're going to talk about ray guns. But now we're going to talk about if you're a space marine. I mean, it would just be, it was crazy. That's how a lot of the old games were written.
Even just stuff like this will cause 4 to 16 points of damage, and you're like, wait, what does that mean? What? Oh, it's 44.
Well, as a good example of that, and I love older games, both because I think the rule sets are fun, but also for the nostalgia. Recently I had to brush up on 1E to run that Ravenloft adventure I was talking about. And if you want to go into 1E and refresh yourself on the combat and initiative rules, it is not straightforward. They're all, there's some of it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, some of it's in the Player's Handbook, and in some cases the initiative rules, if I remember right, kind of contradict each other.
Shane, I have seen seminars. I'm not joking at all. I have seen seminars at conventions, and this is 2020 on how do you do first edition initiative. They still don't know how to do it after all these years. It is very confusing.
It's all
process,
over the place.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not, you got to take off your rose-colored glasses at some point and say, that it wasn't perfect, but boy, it was fun, and it was good enough that it launched, a massive hobby. Those TSR games helped launch the hobby, and I think that a point that, as Carl was talking, occurred to me is when you have companies producing new rule books, new adventures, new this, new that for these clones, they're saying, and the people that are buying them are saying, it's not just nostalgia. Not just nostalgia. These rule systems are good enough on their own to keep playing, right? That these rule systems are a fun game, right? And that you don't have to necessarily play 5e to have fun playing D&D or whatever. Even though that these games have iterated and done stuff. In some cases, every edition of a game takes some step forwards and some steps back, in my opinion. And 5e is a good version. It's obviously very accessible. It's taken off like nobody's business, but there's some stuff I miss from older editions. My favorite thing about 5e, and I will never stop saying, I think advantage disadvantage is a great, is a fantastic mechanic. It just it does a lot quickly that all the bonuses and negatives and all from other editions we're trying to do. Which, speaking of, I want to throw out another OSR that gets a lot of love. I've only played it once, but it's Dungeon Crawl Classics. That
DCC's fun. Yeah,
they get all, and they actually have a dice chain. They have different dice to represent the bonuses and negatives and everything.
DCC is one of those odd ducks where I think everybody kind of agrees it's on the edge of OSR. They're just not sure if it's on inside of that edge or outside of it.
Or on the outside.
The edge.
OSR reminds me a lot of film noir because you could say with film noir is a certain kind of film. In the 40s and 50s, they had to do with light, the light and shadow. And you look at a movie like Double Indemnity, that's definitely a noir movie. But then you start getting, is Body Heat film noir? Well, it came out in 1980. It's color, but it has the same kind of themes. Is Blood Simple? I mean, so you come to think, well, is that really film noir, or is it just acting like film noir, or does it have some elements of film noir? You got the same thing with gaming. Is that an actual OSR game, or does it just have like Carl was talking about, Castle Crusades? It's true. A lot of people don't really consider that an OSR game, even though it has a lot of aspects of what you would consider an OSR game. The same with DCC. DCC is not really considered an OSR game, but it kind of drifts into that territory because I know when Joe Goodman wrote the game, he took all of Gary Gygax's suggested reading and he read it all. He read all what's called Appendix N, which was an appendix
Right.
back to the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Which has started to take on mythical proportions. People talk about Appendix N, and there's an entire podcast devoted to Appendix N right now.
Well, and DCC is what DCC is. It's an Appendix N game. He took all the Appendix N books, he read them all, and he said, "Okay, here's my game." And so it's different than D&D in that respect. So yeah, there's a lot of cross pollination here, and I think sometimes people get too hung up, and is this OSR? Is this not OSR? And I mean, like I said, nostalgia is a powerful drug. People love to play the games they grew up with. Sometimes the things we call bugs, they think are features. I was going to play a game called Metamorphosis Alpha, which was the first science fiction role-playing game written by Jim Ward back in the 70s. And they recently did a really nice reprint of it. So I thought, I'm going to play this the way it was written for my group, just, so we can play a game as it was originally written. And as I'm reading the rules, I realized there is an absolutely essential part of the rules that was left out of the rulebook. And then I called up Jim Wampler, who was one of the editors on the project. I said, "Do you realize that there's no attack classes for any of the monsters in the book?" He said, "Congratulations, you found the flaw in the rules." I was like, "Oh my God, you seriously?" He said, "Yeah." So it's just, I mean, you consider that a bug, but people that play back then would consider it a feature. Like, okay, well, we'll just make up the attack classes.
We'll make it up, yeah. There was a lot. I think there was a lot more having to figure it out on your own or house ruling in the older games than we remember. Because I actually had to sit down and I was like, oh, and it occurred to me years later. I remember playing first edition D&D with my friends, but the more I look at it, we were playing this strange hybrid of BX and first edition. But I had forgotten that. I think you forget how much you kind of fill in stuff or do your own whatever just to make it work and have fun. But anyway, let me I want to move us over to Frog God Games. I definitely want to make sure to talk a little bit about that. Before I do that, I'm going to throw out some show notes. But folks, when we get back with the show notes, we're going to be talking about Frog God Games, and I have a super secret special story from Michael Badolato's past to share.
Oh dear.
Yes, it's not so secret, but I read it, so I'm going to share it. So,
okay.
But to keep people's interest, it's a super secret story. So, and it's actually really neat. So, it ties into gaming history. All right, true believers, let's do those show notes. First of all, you can always reach me on Twitter at ShanePlays, ShanePlays, and I'll talk more about my Twitter account here in a moment. The show notes and links for every episode, including this one, are up at shaneplays.com. That's ShanePlays.com. Speaking of show notes and links, my previous show, which is episode 233, the Asunder RPG with Adam Lawson and Robert J. Schwab, is up. The podcast releases in a variety of venues, if you will, of course being the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, YouTube, and more. Yes, it does go out on YouTube, just the audio. It's not a video podcast version on YouTube. Some people like to listen there, so we'll go ahead and put it up there. And Shane Plays is also carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. KryptonRadio.com. There's a couple of ways to support the show if you would like. Of course, I do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/ShanePlays. And I also, on my Twitter accounts, yes, Twitter accounts, I'll clarify that here in a second, I often post affiliate links from Humble Bundle and other sources that allow you to get cool ebooks, RPG books, video games, audio and visual software, you name it, at a discount. And then I get a little commission off that. So it never bothers me a bit if somebody uses my affiliate links for those kind of things. Those Twitter accounts are, my main one is just Shane Plays, ShanePlays, and that's where I just constantly tweet everything, you name it, whatever comes into my head. It makes it to my fingers into the keyboard. The other account that I have is Shane Plays PR. It's ShanePlays PR, and that is just the meat and potatoes. I put out basic news about the show, those affiliate links, and maybe news that I think is cool in it every now and then. So if you want If you want to keep up with Shane Plays but not have as many tweets, follow Shane Plays PR. Last but never least, I want to mention advertising partner Cursova Magazine, CIRSOVA Magazine. It's the adventure fiction magazine of the day. It's pulp fiction, it's sci-fi, it's fantasy, sometimes has D&D content. I mean, it's just a really cool magazine, so go check it out. CIRSOVA Magazine. And now back to the show with Michael Bad Mike Badolato and Carl Heyl. Thank you so much for listening. All right, and we're back. You know, and I realized I forgot to give you a chance, Michael. You do a podcast with Eric Tenkar, if I'm
Eric Tenkar. We do a Wednesday night podcast. Although it's available online on his Tenkar's Tavern site. Eric is a machine. He was hospitalized most of this year. He's been in the hospital 3 times, but he does a little broadcast or podcast every day. He does like a 15-minute podcast, and it's on his if you go to YouTube and look up Tenkar's Tavern, it's there. And he's been in the community for quite a few years. He did a blog before he did a podcast, but we do something called Talking Crit, which is just basically Eric and I talking crit for about an hour and a half. We have guests in the industry sometimes, but nice. We just recently started doing a commitment that we're going to do it every week, and so we're probably in about our second month of doing weekly broadcasts with that. But we've done it for a long time. We just didn't have a really good schedule to go on, and 2020 is not the year for keeping schedules. So we're doing things normally. It's been nuts, but yes, we do that. It's fun if you just like to listen to 2 old guys talk about gaming. That's pretty much what we do, and we'll have guests on. We have all kinds of guests on, just from every facet of tabletop gaming. And we don't do interviews and we don't do reviews. We just get in there and just start talking and say, we'll just talk about the subject A, and what do you think about subject A, special guest person, and we just roll off that. And we call it the hex crawl of podcasting, because we don't really know where we're going. We just kind of roll around and we end up, and then, oh, look, we did an hour and a half. Oh, wow. We didn't talk about anything, but so I've had a lot of fun doing that. I have not been a part of regular broadcast in a long time. And so, I'm enjoying it. So it's fun what you guys do. Carl is a machine too. He's been doing his stuff. The first time I heard Carl do a podcast, I don't remember which one that was, Carl. It was on the Discord channel.
It was the Dungeon Show.
The Dungeon Show.
A short-lived project, but it was fun.
It was fun. I remember listening to it and I'm going, this guy's got a voice for radio. This is a great show. And I listened to it. It was good. That got me hooked on Carl, man.
Hooked on Carl.
It was good stuff. I remember that. It was good.
We hate him for his voice, but good for you, Carl. Good for you. No, Carl's been out there. How long have you been doing Save or Die? How long have you been doing it?
3-ish years, I think.
Yeah.
And Save or Die has existed for a long time.
Right.
The previous hosts left, and then some new hosts came in, and those hosts left, and finally they got desperate enough to put me on.
There you go. Well, now, it's ironic. Well, not ironic, but some of the original Save or Die hosts are now on Crusader with you, right? Is Mike and Elizabeth, are they not on?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And they were 2 of the original hosts of Save or Die. Right. But yeah, so now we're on. We've just made it really confusing. So a lot of times people will say I'm on. They'll think I'm part of Save for Half, which I'm not.
Right.
Other than a listener, I think it's a great show.
Save for Half is a fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's a good show. Yeah. Very good
show. But Mike and Liz have done a lot with Castles and Crusades and Victorious, another Troll Lord product that Mike Stewart wrote.
Yeah, they've either been fans or contributors of Troll Lord games since the beginning, pretty much. And I've got a podcast out there where I interviewed them for Victorious, and very nice people, and they do cool stuff. All right, so for Michael Battalato, it is Talking Crit. with Eric Timkar. And for Carl, it is the Crusader podcast and the Save or Die podcast. And for me, of course, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, which you're listening to right now, which I'm past my 5th year, 5.5 years. I enjoy it a lot. If there's one thing I can do, it's flap my lips and talk about stuff.
Yeah.
So, all right, as promised, here's the super secret story of Michael Badolato.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, this is on his About page for Frog God Games with the Frog Crew. This is a nice piece of gaming history here, actually. So, verbatim from Mike's entry. In 2003, Mike picked up a copy of El Conquistador number 12, a Chicago-based small press magazine for diplomacy players, and discovered a lost Greyhawk adventure called The Expedition into the Black Reservoir by Gary Gygax. Now, if that's not interesting enough, this is really interesting to me. Mike contacted Gary, who had forgotten all about the short story. He had written in 1975 in exchange for a full-page ad in the magazine. So the Expedition into the Black Reservoir is now believed to be the very first Greyhawk-based fiction ever published, and that issue of El Conquistador has since become a collector's item. So that's very cool. Not only did you find this obscure Gary Gygax thing, but you reach out to Gary and he's like, I had totally forgotten I even did that.
So I have a few little, I forgot about that story. That's a few little bullet points to add there. So I want to throw in the name of Eddie Cortrell, who was a friend of mine. He just passed away a couple weeks ago, sadly. He was the first one when I picked this up and showed it to him. He said, you need to tell Gary Gygax about this. I bet he doesn't remember this story.
Oh, wow.
Because it was a fanzine for diplomacy players, and it came out in the 70s. And like I said, what they would do is they would trade ad space for articles, because a lot of these fanzines need articles, right? And Gary Gygax was just starting in the business back then. And so basically what he did was he said, I'll write you a story about my Greyhawk campaign. Can you run a couple ads? And sure enough, in that issue Conquistador, there's a full page ad for the White Box. There's a couple of ads for the Dungeon Hobby Shop. And there's a story, Expedition to the Black Reservoir, which is, features some of the characters of Ernie Gygax, who was Gary's son, and going on an expedition. I think there's 4 characters in all. 2 of them are actually named characters. I don't remember the names of them, but they were Ernie's characters, and he had absolutely forgotten he wrote these stories.
Wow.
And he wrote another one too. He wrote another one that was a Boot Hill campaign. That's actually another issue Conquistador. And I can't remember the name of that one. I didn't discover that one, so I can't have credit for that. But yes, nobody had thought about these for, 20, 30 years. And then I just contacted Gary, because I said, did you write this? And he said, oh, yeah, I did write that, but I totally forgot I wrote that. And he gave me the whole story. He said, I wrote it for ad space. And then Alan Groh, who in our community is a huge, huge Greyhawk scholar, I was friends with him and online. He's like, and I contacted him and he was all excited. He said, well, can you, this is back when, you didn't really have a lot of blog spots or things like that. So I just transcribed it word for word, and they published it in what was called the OSRIC Journal, which was an online fanzine. It was an online magazine, I guess they called it back then.
Was the Greyhawk name of the planet, right? OSRIC. Yeah. And
so they published it, and then Gary put a letter in or put a note in afterwards, said, yeah, because I'm sure there were some people out there that thought, okay, this guy, Mike Badolato, just made this up. But no, Gary posted afterwards, said, yep, I wrote that. Mr. Badolato contacted me and I wrote it and this, that. And everybody's like, whoa, that's so cool. But it's considered the first piece of Greyhawk fiction ever published in 1975. So this was an absolutely lucky find. It was no great research, or I didn't do any, I didn't do some John Peterson style research where I went by all these old. I just happened to find something at Half Price Books, bought it and read it, and said, "Hey, that's Gary Gygax's name on there." And then my friend Eddie pointed it out to me, and that was it. So
nice, yeah, I love that. Yeah,
I was happy to be a link in the chain. Somebody would have eventually discovered it. If it wasn't for me, 10 years later, somebody would have pulled that out and said, "Hey, this is Gary Gygax." So
that's
I was just
cool,
lucky.
Though. That's a nice story. And I love that Gary had forgotten about it. Before you said
he's a busy man. He's a busy man. He doesn't have time to remember all these little stories he wrote for magazines back in the day. So
yeah, well, we think of, like, I've kind of over the past few years turned into a sort of amateur scholar of RPG history. So we look at this stuff like it's fragments of, the ancient world that must, it's incredibly important. And the people doing it at the time were just, like I remember, and then we'll talk about Frog God after that. But I remember at North Texas, I was hanging out with Alex and a couple other people in the little restaurant area. Zeb Cook walked up and was just having a beer, and they were talking right in front of him about, oh yeah, man, I found all these memos of that related to you about your employment and this, and it was just boring work stuff. But for the archaeologist of gaming history, it's incredibly important. But Zeb's like, yeah, whatever. He's just sitting there drinking his beer. For him, it was just paperwork from work.
John Peterson wrote a book called Playing
at the World.
Playing at the World.
Yeah. And
it was a detailed examination, gigantic book, but it's a great read. It's a detailed examination of TSR in the years before AD&D 1.0 came out. So from like 72 to about 77 or so. And what John used he actually was able to find these people had saved like sales receipts and print runs. So he was actually able to tell you by doing research how many of the white boxes were published. What was their cost? I mean, this is amazing. Some of the stuff people just didn't really care about and was just thrown away was essential research to his book, because these were actual memos the company had about, we published 3,000 copies of this, and each unit cost us $6, and so this is all very to the historian in our hobby. This stuff was just like just gold. It was like
golden document. Yeah, it's finding the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. Yeah, mm-hmm. John Peterson I have nothing but respect for his approach to how he researches things. He's basically, like an archaeologist, and he'll find stuff and be able to explain the relevance. Playing at the World, his blog also, Playing at the World, is good. And then he's got a new book about to come out.
I saw that just today, and I'm so excited. Look, it sounds extremely interesting for geeks like us. That kind of stuff is extremely interesting.
Yeah, if I remember right, he's exploring the very hard to nail down topic of what actually role playing is, like what is considered role playing in gaming.
Right.
So, but just if people, and I've had John on before talking about Playing at the World, but if people haven't heard that, or if they're not familiar with, he traces basically the history of wargaming up through role playing games, and it's a really, really, really good study on it.
What's great about John, it's different than a lot of historians, is he doesn't use any anecdotal information. He will only use stuff that he has print of. So if somebody has a story that have a story that this happened, he won't use it because it's not written down. He will only use written down memos or notes or anything, which I think is a really interesting approach. But he says that's a purely scientific application of being a historian. Is that I don't trust anecdotes. I don't trust when people say this, I was in the room and I heard this. He will only use actual written material, which I think is really interesting. But it makes his stuff very informative because it's the truth. I mean,
he's like I said, he's got a very scholarly approach.
Very much so.
He's not spinning yarns, and there's books out there that spin yarns, and those are fine too. But he's approaching it like a scholar. So all right, because I want to make sure to feature Frog God games. So tell us a little bit, what space would you say Frog God occupies? What does Frog God try to do?
When you look at gaming companies, there you have the upper tier, which is basically you got your WotC and your Paizo, and there's really not a lot of other companies up there. I mean, there's only about 2 or 3 companies that make a lot of money in our industry that are just top of the food chain. We're kind of right below that. We're the second tier of game companies. But we basically are putting out, we just do all role-playing games. We don't do tabletop games. Approaching it from a nostalgia point, because the byline of the company used to be 3rd edition rules, 1st edition feel. That's when the company first came out, because Clark Peterson and Bill Webb, who's Bill Webb, who still runs the company now. Clark's gone on to other things. He's actually a judge now. Bill runs the company. Most of the early stuff they published was based on Bill's campaign that he ran in the late 70s, early 80s. And so what they did was they converted a lot of, when the OGL came out, the open game license, which means that anything could be converted to third edition rules. They took a lot of his old campaigns and they especially one of the biggest ones was Rapid Ethic, which would become very famous later on because it's been reprinted several times since then, and it's probably our biggest money maker ever in the company. He translated these to third edition rules and they published them, and they immediately became a huge success. Back then they were called Necromancer Games when he and Clark ran the company, and they had a really good run for about 10 years or so, and then Clark didn't want to do games anymore. Once 4th edition D&D came out, probably the less spoken about that, the better. No, it's not a terrible system. It just was not a very popular, not as popular as probably every other edition. Right. But there was a period of time when you had something called 4th edition D&D, about 4 or 5 years. They didn't want to do 4th edition D&D, so really the company stopped at that point. And then right about when North Texas popped up, about 2008 or 7 or 8. Bill wanted to get back in the gaming business, and he at that point there was a game called Pathfinder that was taking the world by storm and actually outsold D&D for a few years. That was by Paizo, and what Pathfinder was D&D 3.0. So D&D, so once he dumped D&D 3.0 to start D&D 4.0, Pathfinder said, we're going to do 3.0 because people still like it, but we're going to call it Pathfinder and change it up a little bit. Well, Bill realized there was a market in there for Pathfinder, but he didn't want to just do Pathfinder. And that's when he found Matt Finch. Matt Finch has this game called Swords of Wizardry that is also something Bill loves, which is old school games. And it was basically a copy of OD&D. And so when they started out, they were doing Pathfinder versions of adventures and Swords of Wizardry versions. And so go to today, fast forward to today, we still do Pathfinder. We're one of the few companies that still does Pathfinder 1.0 for a lot of our old fans. But right now we're doing mostly 5th edition adventures, and we still do Swords and Wizardry adventures. We have several large Kickstarters every year. One of our big Kickstarters was we did our reprint of the Swords and Wizardry rules. We did it in a box set, just like the original white box set. So it was a very huge callback to nostalgia. Sure. But it sold really well. It did really good. But we still do. We did a Kickstarter this year called Tehoidal, which was a Mesoamerican setting. We still do pretty big Kickstarters, but we also do Indiegogos. One of the things we're trying to move away from is the gigantic Kickstarter. So for years and years, we would do these huge $100 Kickstarters like Rapid Ethic, which is a gigantic mega dungeon. I mean, this thing's a phone book size book.
And that came from that Bill Webb's original campaign?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they did original campaign that he did, and we published it in the early the earlier aughts when Necromancer first came out, and then it was published in there was a 3rd edition version, then there was a Pathfinder version, and so finally we have a 5th edition version. We're trying to move away from that a little bit, not just because COVID's left everybody with a few less bucks in their pocket, but just a lot of our fans have said, look, we love your gigantic Kickstarters, but gosh, they're just, we can't do 3 or 4 of them a year. They're just too expensive. And, it's a lot of book to have. So we started doing Indiegogos a couple years ago, and that's been a huge success. And our Indiegogos are just individual modules, and we do about one a month. And we only sell about, I don't know, a few, maybe 1,000 units, couple thousand units, and those Kickstarters end up being about $10,000. But those have been very, very well received. And if you just want an adventure, all they are is adventure. Right. They're just like a boy buying an old D&D module. They're $20, and you buy an adventure. And we've had all sorts of really big writers and artists in the industry work on these. We've got one going on right now, which I'm going to clandestinely look on my computer and find out exactly how long we have it going, because I don't know off the top of my head. I didn't prepare here. We're just really about putting out good adventures and putting out stuff that's really easy to play, stuff that you can just pick up and play. like I said, we're moving away from the big giant campaign stuff we used to do, which we did it really well. It wasn't that we did it bad. It was just that our fans seem to want other things right now. They're just like, look, we don't really have this much money to be, dropping on a game system, which we absolutely understand.
Yeah. Well, plus there's also the time debt. Like, I love Mega Dungeons, and I've got several Mega Dungeons I bought. I have no idea if I'm ever actually going to be able to run that with anybody, right? So, but I like the concept.
Right. We like to call them aspirational purchases. In other
Aspiration.
words, yes, you can't wait to get that giant book on your shelf, and you look at it, it looks so great, but then you never actually use it or play it. But you've got this really, really kick-ass looking giant book on your shelf.
There's some Japanese word for the pile of books you don't know if you'll ever get to. Now we need one for the pile of RPG adventures you don't know if you'll ever run. So let me ask this from a business perspective. You've intrigued me. One, I'm glad to hear that your adventure crowdfunding is doing well, because the quote-unquote conventional wisdom is that adventures don't fund well. I've heard that from several people. So is there a reason why you do those on Indiegogo versus Kickstarter?
Because there's a couple reasons. Because we do most of our larger stuff on Kickstarter. So if we're doing a big book, like we just recently did The Lost Lands, which is our first campaign, but we did everything backwards. Okay. Our company's been around for 20 years. We finally published our campaign world after 20 years. So normally what you do is you start out with the campaign world, then you publish a bunch of adventures in it. No. We did it absolutely backwards. So last year we came out with Lost Lands, which is a huge, giant book, and it was like $100 book. So most of those kind of projects, when we still have them, are going to be on Kickstarter. What Indiegogo, we didn't want people to get mixed up between our Kickstarters or Indiegogos, or individual adventures. So Indiegogo was the perfect solution to that. Like, look, we're going to put all our individual adventure type stuff on Indiegogo. We're going to put all our huge, giant books or campaign supplements or anything having to do with the Lost Lands, which is our actual game world. Okay. That's all going to be on Kickstarter. So people were a little confused at first, and I think people have figured it out by now that if you see an Indiegogo for us, it's just going to be an adventure or a small adventure supplement. Anything on Kickstarter is going to be much larger, and it's going to be more of a campaign type thing. And like right now, we have Book of Taverns Volume 3 is up on Indiegogo. It's already funded, but it's a book. It's got we have a series called the Book of Taverns. This is our third one. What they do is each one of them contains 2 fully detailed taverns, and you can just drop them in any campaign. And so that's what this one is, and those have been extremely popular. And actually, we were actually pretty surprised the popularity of our Indiegogo. We did not think we would sell as many as we do. And it's like you say, because we always hear that adventures don't sell, but we found out that good adventures do sell. If you price them at a good part, if you make them look good, you put a nice cover on them, good artwork, we have good, really, really great stable of writers. They sell great. So we've had no problem. We've actually done very well this year. Our Indiegogos, even with all the issues with COVID and problems with people having money, people can still afford $20 for really well-written adventure.
So is that do you guys take advantage of the Indiegogo? You can put stuff on demand, right? Like the campaign ends and then you just leave it where you can use it like a store. So I have to ask, if you have the third book of Taverns, does that have random tables in it for the best? How the bar fight starts?
No, the book of that's actually a great idea. But no, we leave all the stuff like that to Matt Finch, because Matt Finch he did the Tome of Adventure Design, which was a book. All it was tables. It's a great book. It's actually our bestseller. It's called the Tome of Adventure Design. Man. It's a huge, giant phone book size book, and it's all tables. It's just table after table after table. But it's our bestseller, our company's bestseller. But no, the Book of Taverns, they're just actual taverns, and they just detail, like, here's a tavern in like a small town, and there'll be a little hook in it, like, here's what the town's about, and you just drop these taverns in. But the first 2 we did were extremely popular, and so we're like, well, we're gonna keep doing them. So we'll probably have a Book of Taverns 4, 5, and 6 eventually.
It's a good idea, because I mean, it's a trope, but it's an effective trope, is to either start an adventure in a tavern where everybody's gathering.
Yeah.
Or have, you've come to the village and the first place they're going to head is the tavern, either that or the general store, So, but yeah, I just remember back in like junior high and high school, somebody in the party was always going to provoke a fight in the tavern.
There's always going to be a bar fight.
Yeah, these days it doesn't happen as much, but back in the day, there was always going to be a brawl. So you mentioned Pathfinder. Is Frog God looking into Pathfinder 2.0 at all, or are you just sticking with 1? Or
2.0 is a negatory right now.
Okay.
We had a very loyal fan base that really, they pretty much financed the company in the early days by buying stuff like Slumbering Czar, which was Pathfinder, and we have to this day we still service these same customers. There's very few companies putting out Pathfinder 1.0. We haven't found any need at this point to actually switch over to 2.0. And to be honest with you, we really don't have a lot of people asking to do it.
Well, when
we're doing well. We print on demand too. So we don't print a lot of extra stuff. For Indiegogo, we offer 3 choices: Swords and Wizardry, 5th edition, or Pathfinder. And so we're only printing to order. We're not printing a lot,
right.
A lot of extras or anything. It's become extremely successful because look, there was nothing wrong with Pathfinder 1.0.
Right.
Dirty little secret. There wasn't. There's nothing wrong with it, except the problem in our industry right now is, or it's always been a problem in our industry, is you have to keep moving. You're like a shark. You can't just say, "Here's our game. We're not going to ever change anything. We're not coming up with anything new, and here's our game." You will not make money after 2 or 3 years because people, they want new content over and over. And what happened with Pathfinder is they said, "Look, 1.0 has been out all these years. We just have to do something new. We got everybody's saturated with Pathfinder 1.0, and that's why D&D has a new edition every 6 or 7 years for the same reason."
Sure.
But I mean, they just, everybody's bought it. You've saturated your audience has bought everything you come out with. What can we do next?
And then they drop the next edition, and we complain and scream while we happily fork our money over.
And there's nothing wrong with Pathfinder 1.0. So our Pathfinder 1.0 fans are very loyal, and we honestly we've had a few inquiries about Pathfinder 2.0, but until we receive a lot of inquiries about it, we're not going to do the work to convert to 3.0.
Everything I've heard about Pathfinder, and I have not played it. Everything I've heard about Pathfinder 2nd edition is that people like the system. Like they're like, it's a nice system.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at the pie charts of who's playing what, 1st edition is still way ahead of 2nd edition. So I don't know how that will balance out.
They had some issues with the rollout. They upset a lot of the fans because if people who remember, one of the things that Pathfinder had said at the very beginning was, "We'll never have a 2nd edition."
Oh, did they really? Okay.
Yeah, you have to learn never say things like that.
Yeah.
Never say. And they had said, "We're never going to have a 2nd edition. So if you buy our books will be good forever." Well, they will be good forever, but they did decide at some point they do want a 2nd edition.
Somebody got to looking at a spreadsheet and went,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, I mean, people forget there's a business behind the hobby,
Sure.
And these are big. Especially WotC, these are big. They can't just, they have a lot of overhead, is what I'm saying. They've got bills to pay, so they can't,
if you got to come up with new things, if you don't come up with new stuff, then we're actually not like a lot of companies, Frog Eye Games, because we don't actually have a rule system. Like WotC is about a rule system. D&D, Paizo is about a rule system. Pathfinder, we do publish Swords and Wizardry, but obviously that's not the entire focus of our company because we also publish 5e, we publish other things. So we're different in that respect. Is that we're publishing supplements and rules editions and monster books for other systems, and so we're allowed a little more flexibility because if tomorrow WotC decides, "Oh, you know what, we're going to do D&D 6.0," well, guess what? We'll just start publishing 6.0 books.
Right.
It's no big deal for us, no problem. So
it's you adapt. In fact, in some ways, that might help you to have another edition.
Sure.
So. And I'm looking at your product lines on your website right now. You have 5th edition, Swords and Wizardry, Pathfinder, System Neutral, other systems, bestiaries, maps, and virtual tabletop. Now, I assume that's products you publish for use on a virtual tabletop, not your own virtual tabletop.
Right,
So.
and then that is, and I will tell you right now, I am technologically a moron. That is not my specialty. But we do VTT stuff, and we are in the process of having a lot of our classics, especially Rapid and Athic, which is just gigantic. It's being transferred, I guess, Roll20. Does that,
Sure.
Roll20?
Yeah, that's the big with that, and Fantasy Grounds.
Mm-hmm.
Are the big
Yeah,
ones.
Fantasy Grounds, Roll20. We actually have some very loyal fans that have been converting a lot of our adventures for Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, and there are a lot available for those systems. So if you go on Fantasy Grounds and go on Roll20, you will find some Frog Out Game products on there.
Okay, and then I see you mentioned your setting of the Lost Lands. I see the Lost Lands World Anvil here. You got stuff on sale. Basically, people go check out Frog God Games. And is there any specific reference there to like a frog god from D&D or anything like that, or do you know where that came from?
It was based on the god, the old Lovecraftian god, the Saga, Saga, and it just became kind of a mascot of the company. We also have a big connection to Orcus. If you notice, Orcus appears in a ton of our products. Okay. And matter of fact, we just did a holiday module called Orcus on the 34th level, which is a cheery little Christmas adventure.
Yeah,
so Orcus became one of our company mascots, and so did the Frog God, the Saga. So that's where Frog God Games comes from.
Well, you'll be glad to know that I ran Out of the Abyss for my group. And at the end, there's an opportunity. The wand of Orcus is just laying there. And one of my you have those players that are like, they have to touch everything, like touch. Like,
but don't you love those players?
I do love those players. But that player picked up the wand of Orcus, failed her saving throw, and died instantly. So you'll be glad to know that happened. Orcus is still out there causing
That's
mischief.
Beautiful.
Even in 5e, you can die instantly sometimes. So. All right, well, I'm going to wrap us up here. I thank both of you for your time. We'll see if either of y'all have any last thoughts, and then I'm going to inflict the dreaded yet highly anticipated bad joke of the week on you. So, Carl, any last thoughts there, buddy, on anything? Recommendations, anything? You got anything?
Play old school games. Swords and Wizardry is a great entry point to old school games. And if you listen to this and you've only played 5th edition or you've never played any RPG, give it a shot. It's fun.
Roll some dice. Have some fun. How about you, Michael? Mike.
Yes, Swords Wizardry rule set is free on the Frog God Games website, froggodgames.com. You can download the rules for free. You can't beat that. And we also have, as Carl mentioned earlier, something called Swords Wizardry Lite, which is a 4-page version of our rules. It's absolutely playable. I've run games at conventions using it. I've run games online using it. It's great for kids and great for people who are just learning how to play role-playing games. So check out Swords Wizardry. Check out Swords Wizardry Lite.
And Carl's not just talking. I've seen him post, hey, I'm going to be at this game store and I'm going to run Swords and Wizardry Lite. Bring your kids. So he's Carl's legit. So, and he's a very fun GM. Very fun. So he'll line up he'll have 10 kids around a table and he'll.
It's a great, Carl. It's a great kids game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Swords and
Wizardry Lite. Really, I think. Maybe the easiest game for kids to grasp onto. I think even easier than stuff like No Thank You Evil or things that kind of abstract things more. I think the solidity of Swords and Wizardry, the solidity of D&D, especially old school D&D, kids really get.
Was it you that was somebody was posting they were running a game with a kid and the familiar was like a centipede? And they ate the centipede and wondered if they got poisoned.
No, it was even wilder than that.
Yeah,
the familiar, the animal companion, was a mimic. So the kid had aimed a mimic in this game that we decided that the mimic would be his pal because this kid just loved mimics, loved the idea of them. Well, the mimic ate a centipede. Well, if the mimic eats a centipede, mimic has to make a poison save. And it was fine. The mimic lived, but it was like boy and his dog, but it was a elf and its mimic.
Yeah, exactly right. An elf and his mimic. And speaking of mimics, I love this. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything just came out recently for 5e. And in the table of contents, I haven't read this yet, but there is something called a mimic colony. So if you want a Zen moment, ponder on what does a mimic look like when it's not copying something else. So a colony, mimics. Okay, here is the bad joke of the week. Are we ready? And I picked this out in honor of Frog God Games. So what is green and loud?
I don't know what.
A froghorn.
Oh man,
It's actually funny. I like that. It's funny.
All right,
I'm a dad though. I'm an old man. I'm a dad.
I love bad jokes. All right, I picked out another one since there's two of you. I've got another joke here.
Oh, dear.
Why are frogs rarely angry?
I don't know why.
They eat whatever bugs them.
Oh,
Okay.
Yes, that's the correct
I'm out on that one. Sorry.
All right. Well, Mike and Carl, it's been a heck of a lot of fun having you. Folks, check out Frog God Games and Swords and Wizardry and all the other cool stuff they're doing. Check out Talking Crit, the podcast with Michael Badolato and Eric Tinkar. And check out Carl on as the co-host on both the Crusader podcast and the Save or Die podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been wanting to come on for a while, and it's good to connect with Carl too. Carl's my bud.
Yeah,
So, I appreciate you having me on here. It's great.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. And again, I have nothing but high esteem for North Texas RPG Con. So,
Well, come back then if one of these days.
I surely do plan on it. And I'll even try not to take Zeb Cook out with my with my clothing cart.
Yeah, don't take out our special
Yeah,
guest.
don't take out our gaming legends.
Not the
please.
guest. Not the guest.
Yeah. It'd be like, look around to see if anybody's looking and just kind of lay my stuff down and scurry off. Yeah. All right. Well, Carl, thanks again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you on Shane Plays.
Thank you.
Talk. And everybody else, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays. Thanks so much for listening.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.